strategically in that way. A lot of it is not even visible because it goes in private interactions, but it's initiated on the public platform. And I also participate not only in this general social media networks and platforms like LinkedIn, but also specialist forums. Specialist meaning that my focus is mental health, so in that area. And more than anything else, I really try to engage as much as possible with my business partners and my customers or potential customers. And I do this again more than on the general platforms. I do more in specialist forums, and I do both online and in person. So I talk a lot about my motives for starting this company, and I share a lot of personal information as well, because people engage much more easily, find it much more comfortable if they can relate on a personal level, and also share some milestones of the business development. But again, another type of concern, it's not really a real concern. We can really find a good strategy for it. That for me personally and for this type of business, so it's a tech platform, and also healthcare related. So security is a very important aspect of this. So for example, I would not want to give away too much information about a very early stage product that even before these features are worked out and developed to a certain extent that is sufficient to go out and start marketing it. So other than that, I never really have this. Many people have fears about the visibility and feedback. I really enjoy the feedback, all kinds of feedback.
Awesome. Thank you. Ian, I'm curious from a legal aspect and your experience, I'd love to hear your stories.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, in the past, I've launched a number of businesses in the property industry and in marketing and consulting, and those were mostly sort of, personal relationships. You'd build them up offline, and it would be a case of, the people you'd met and the networks you'd grown during your career. And things have been very different with New. Basically, I took the plunge to launch New it was February last year. And my thinking generally is that, to get traction takes time. And if you don't have the networks and the contacts to get something going, then inevitably you're going to have to try and find out who your customers are, get some feedback, iterate, and do that in a way that can't be done offline. So LinkedIn was the first answer really to that. And just because it takes time to build trust with people, with your customer base, generally your network and investors and possible partners, I knew that I just had to start and just do something. The component of building in public and displaying what you're doing and the details of it come into question along the way. But I knew that something had to happen. Personal brand, selling to people and relationships were at the heart of all of it. So I had to kind of demonstrate who I was. And I made the failure of not doing that in the right way in the beginning by talking too much about the business and not about me. So building a business in public on LinkedIn, for example, it is a personal brand thing, and building that trust takes being out there consistently, showing that you're not just going to vanish from the internet and from the scene, because that's not going to work out. So really, I just spent my time trying to find who my customers were, get in front of them, network, try not to be weird about it, because LinkedIn can be a little bit weird. And I think that's something to bear in mind. But with the customer feedback element, I must say that the LinkedIn feedback is a lot more positive and I'd say exaggerated. So it's something to bear in mind. I'd put ideas out there and people would be like, that's fantastic. But in reality, the customers don't want what the people on LinkedIn want. So taking that with a pinch of salt is definitely important. But from the legal side of it, I mean, it depends on what the business is. If it's consumer based or business to business, depends if you're hoping to trade internationally. There are various aspects that come with that. And generally, just being on the internet is a legal risk, especially if you don't have a company and you're just winging it as an individual, sole trader, sole proprietor. Then you're putting your personal assets at risk, and you don't have that barrier between you and the world. So I think being very careful about when you start trading, because some people think, okay, I'm just going to do some research, chat to people, that kind of stuff. There comes a point where you're doing things with commercial intent and you're actually trading So you have privacy compliance issues to deal with, regulatory compliance matters. If you've got various stakeholders involved and people that you work with and co-founders and things like that, some of them might not want you sharing their details and who they are online, and they might not want you to talk too much about what you're actually doing, because they might have an idea about how this could be rolled out, how your business could be rolled out, and there you are chatting about bits and bobs that could put some ripples out there with your stakeholders, negative ones. But just as an example, if you're looking at international stuff, that's what I'm doing, and I'm very careful about it because I'm in a regulated space. So if you're in medical or finance or legal, for example, in one country you could do what you plan to do without being qualified, or you may not. You'll have different compliance requirements and things like that. So as soon as you start talking about possibly trading or doing something in a different country, you've got additional compliance aspects to cover. And the same applies with your brand. If you've got, you may have researched your brand name in the UK or in Jamaica, wherever you're based, and then you go and chat about being in the States using your brand, and then you step on the toes of someone and you infringe their trademark. And there you are thinking it's all well and good building a business and it's all happy days. And suddenly you get a legal letter, which obviously won't be very nice. Ultimately, confidentiality is a big one. It all really depends on what the contracts say. You may have partners like supply chain partners, or even some investors might want certain aspects of your business to be kept confidential. So if you're talking about that as well, it's not a case of just data protection and possibly sharing people's names that you shouldn't, but it's also confidentiality, and your contract will say what you can and can't talk about. So it's definitely important to look at that, not to get too much into the nitty-gritties of it. But on the security and the legal security side, it's something you may want to talk about. But particularly if you're an individual and you're not running things through a business to begin with, you're possibly putting your home address out there, and you'll create a chain of your activities, your movements. If you put your birthday out there, if you have documents publicly that you've signed, your signatures out there, you've got fraud concerns that need to be considered. So security, password security, privacy of your address, and any sensitive information of yourself is fundamental to cover. So that's a big part of it. But yeah, really trying to just get a decent understanding of what the risks are, I think is essential. There's so much to think about as a founder, and you're setting up a business, you get all excited, you want to do all this stuff. But there are contractual, regulatory, copyright, intellectual property aspects of this, and then not ruffling the feathers of your co-founder who wants to be more private about it, or your investor who has a go-to-market strategy that you scupper because you're, posting online willy-nilly about what you're up to. So those are some of the things that have been important to me, and the kind of stuff I talk to other people about.
No, good point. Phil, I'd love to hear your perspective as from an investor or other angle that you have.
I'll say something about investment in a moment, but there was something in what Ian said that I'd just pull out and build on or remark on, and that's about I suppose hype or vanity. Really, you can start this building in public process, and you can post regularly. I post regularly on LinkedIn, and you get, because LinkedIn is a very supportive community generally, you get lots of positive comments about what you're doing, and you have to work out how much of it is genuinely in support of the product that you're doing, or I find people, and I do it, I like a post, not because I like a post, but because I'm using like to bookmark it to go back and read it, later in the evening or something. So people say, I saw something the other day, I've had 1 million people, like my content or read my content. And you think, well, what does it actually mean, in terms of what can I take from that? In support of what I'm trying to do. So then So yeah, it's a kind of vanity metrics, I suppose. You need not to fool yourself, I guess is what I'm getting at. In terms of, from an investor perspective, certainly traditionally, in all the time I've been, investing, been a member of several angel groups, get lots of pitches sent to me and so on. There's traditionally, I'd say, most founders and most investors come to a meeting point when most of the building is done. You come up with an idea and you maybe get a couple of co-founders to work with you and you build, in tech, you build a platform, you build an app, or you build a product. And it's often, or historically, often only at that point that you say, I'm trying to raise money, and then you start to try and engage investors in what effectively is a fait accompli. I want to take this product live. I've got a problem to solve. I've got a vision, etc., etc. But I think more recently, and it might be because in the last year my profile is growing. I get more inquiries from founders that begin earlier in the process. I'd like, can I talk to you about your thoughts or about your opinion about a solution for this problem? And that's part of a relationship building process. And I think that's a, if you like, a better way to begin building something, because you're getting more opinions about what might work, what the market might want earlier on in the process than hitherto seems to have been, the approach that people have taken, at least from my experience.
Yeah, I love that. I'll jump in real quick and basically say, I'm depending what I do, I tend not to share publicly until I'm ready to launch, until I'm in a beta phase. With that said, it depends also on the business. Quick background: I used to buy emergency rooms, and they were bankrupt. And the ones that I thought were going to do well, I would purchase, and I would let people know ahead of time because I already had the contract, and I wasn't worried about someone competing with me because I had that area. And for them to build another ER, it would take them 2 years to build, so I felt safe. And so it goes back to what the idea is and what that product line and what can be done. I'll give a real life example now. Everybody's talking about AI and ChatGPT and all these large language models, about all these different products coming out, and everybody's talking about their product. And some of them are not developed, some of them are just about to launch, but they're doing it because there's so much space, in the sense that there's so much demand for it, that even if they take a small subsection of the economy or of that vertical, there's plenty of other ones that can compete. So, that's my 2 cents for now. And I got some other stuff. Thanks for preparing these questions ahead of time. The next one's going to be, how far down the road do you get before starting the public phase, and how much confidence do you want first? So I don't know if we already kind of touched on that and wanted to skip, or if anybody wants to add. Henrietta?
Yeah, I can take this. So I think it's possible to start at any point. So for example, when I started, my plan when I started last year, I didn't even have a very strong plan for this startup. So I was just planning to expand my consulting, and it really helped me actually to get to that point, that from the incubation phase, just because I had the idea of the startup before, quite long before, and to gain the confidence and motivation. I mentioned that this social media presence and interactions can have immense market research value, because you can hook up with not only potential customers but people in the same industry, and then see and ask their opinions. So I made so many connections in that way. So I think it's possible. I think what is very important is it's definitely industry specific, and to really consider carefully what what is appropriate, as what is the best strategy for where we are, the stage we are at, and the industry and the product and so on. So also just one thing about it is that many people say we don't need to worry about anyone stealing our idea, and I know that we may have a different another question for this, but that's for example one reason many people don't start, they just wait. The company has been already on the market for 3 years, and so they are afraid of that. And also there are many personal concerns, so like personality traits and things like that. So people who are a bit more introverted tend to be a bit more hesitant to engage so much in a broader platform. So I'm very much an introvert, for example. I don't usually come across so much as one, but it means that I just basically limited the amount of energy and time that I want to spend and interacting everyone and strangers online and so on, and also just so hard to balance. So this has to be considered on an individual basis, definitely. And again, but starting as early as possible can also be a very good opportunity to overcome these types of fears and to practice and to figure out what experiment with different posting styles, if we post on social media, interaction styles, and so on. So for example, when I started out, I had a very small network, and I didn't get much engagement on my post. I'm still working on that, but I decided that I would focus more on engaging with other people's content, and that was very successful. And it's also because that tends to be my role also in real life. I really enjoy giving thoughtful, deep feedback to people, and I got noticed in that way very quickly. Yeah. So that's also a strategy for that. So it really just depends. I think it's important to consider in different levels.
Thank you. Ian, I'd love to hear your part.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I figured it was important in my case, and it's very important, I think, for other people to just get started with something. It takes time to get traction, and you've got to start somewhere. Whether or not you talk too much about your business is a different question, but building a community and a network of people who could become customers, partners, investors, suppliers, and that kind of stuff is something that needs to happen. And the time that it takes to get traction and actually start bringing in money and making a profitable business, it could be 3 months, 6 months, a year plus, depending on what you're doing. So having the foundations in place with an audience and a customer base and all of that, to accelerate that, at least to have it there for when you need it, I think is instrumental in creating a successful business. And that takes working out who you want to be targeting, we're using the word targeting very loosely there, and getting in front of them and finding out who they are, because sometimes the people you think are your customers aren't, and you might not be sure exactly who your business is most likely to get traction with. So testing that out in a relational way and building trust with people is something that really worked well for me. And talking about who one is, like who you are, about yourself and what you're doing and your mission and your values and stuff, can be more valuable than actually talking about the business. So if you're not sure about what you're planning to launch, or whether you're willing to share exactly what you're planning to do, then it definitely pays to start with the personal branding aspect of it. That's my view.
Awesome. Thank you. And Phil, what are your thoughts?
I go back to this kind of maxim that, people invest in people, really. And it takes longer than you think, I think, to gather your audience together. So, there'd be a good argument for kind of starting earlier. And it doesn't seem to matter to me whether you want to open a coffee bar in Norwich, my city, that sells, ethically sourced fair trade coffee from Ecuador or wherever, or you want to, come up with some existential crisis solving, problem around saving the planet, you've still got to kind of get yourself out there and command this authority. And I think the decisions that people make around whether to go public, go live, are going to be about, their concerns about whether they can carry it off, what first impressions people are going to have of you, because you make that kind of, you put yourself out there and people make that kind of decision about whether they're going to follow you very quickly or they're not, based on what they see with very limited exposure. So there are just some things to think through about when's the right time for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Just as a reminder, we got about a little less than 30 minutes. So I want to make sure we answer these questions, but we have some Q&A time. So I'm just going to encourage everybody to come be as concise and to the point as possible so we can keep going. For this part, I'm just going to say the similar sentiments. I think it depends on the industry, depends what you're doing and what your end goal is. Every time I start a business, I always go with what's my end goal and how do I got to get there. Based on what the other speakers have said, I also think it's important to learn how to pivot. Today you may think it's X product and this is the way to go, but then as you're starting to get feedback from the public or from just seeing what's going on, you may pivot and say, you know what, this is probably not my main focus. Maybe I need to pivot here. And we'll go into that. Now, the next one is legal. Are there any intellectual property and privacy concerns? And I'm going to punt this to Ian first. So that I'd love to see what he has to say.
So yes, there definitely are. With all things, if you want to get into business, there will be risks. Who are listening probably have, or they might be planning to, or may have had 3 or 4 companies already. But it's just a case of doing it and being smart about it and taking calculated risks. It's virtually impossible to mitigate all risks. You might even do everything exactly by the book, and then you end up with a bad actor giving you trouble or some kind of unfortunate mistake or something like that. So yes, legal stuff is important, and I would say that, but I do tackle legal stuff personally from more of an entrepreneurial perspective, calculated risks and bets. I wouldn't necessarily advise other people to do things exactly in the same way that I do them. But, with intellectual property, I have come across a number of situations where people have just been, promoting themselves online. And unfortunately, because they're taking more of a scattergun kind of international type approach rather than being very specific about the territory that they're working in, they are opening themselves up to and have had challenges and legal claims from businesses abroad, from the States, seeming to be one of the more litigious territories, as a lot of us might know. But yeah, with that, you've got a lot of aspects of your intellectual property that need care and attention, whether it's what you're doing as a business and the valuable assets that you have, and not letting that out into the open. That's crucial. I don't post about exactly what I'm doing in terms of the innermost important elements of my plans and what I'm creating as a business. I talk about the platform that we're building and that it's a plug and play legal services business, which has a lot of internal dynamics that people just don't know. I won't talk about the exact plans and how this would compete with some of my competitors. I really like to. And I'm sure you would probably like to talk about a lot of stuff. And I see a lot of people possibly oversharing about what they're doing. So it's just a case of not being too, not shooting from the hip too much legally. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do to protect yourself with terms and conditions, disclaimers, website terms and conditions, even if you're not trading yet or making any money. Just having that in place and registering a company and getting insurance, that stuff, people just don't do it. That's our target market. You'd be surprised to hear how many people will just wing it. And I think that's something that people just need to take very seriously, because legal problems come out of the blue. So getting that right, just get it done, get it out the way, and then you can be a bit more free flowing about what you do. But if you're talking about how you work and how your business operates, and whether you subcontract or whether you're planning to launch in a different country, you're chatting to customers in a different country, automatically you're creating an evidence trail of triggering various compliance obligations that you should have taken care of first. Whether that's data protection, or, if you're employing someone and you publicly showing that you're employing someone in a different country, and you've got employment laws and things to deal with. So, or maybe your clients haven't agreed to you subcontracting your work, and there you are saying, just brought this person on, excited to hand over all the work to them, and then your clients go, hang on a minute, never agreed to that. Where's the contract saying you can share my data or any of the work with these people? So, there's numerous reasons why it pays to be careful, and it's important to just take a little bit of time, but otherwise, you've got to take risks.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I agree with that. I'm just going to add real quick to these comments, and then we'll have Henrietta and Phil say. I would love to hear what their comments are, but I see this as a catch-22. I have some friends that are entrepreneurs, and I agree with you. I feel like they're oversharing, saying too much, and they don't have the basic part, like you said, even the insurance or the LLC set up yet, and yet they're sharing their personal information of their business plan and how they're going to attack, and how their secret sauce to how it's going to change the world. And I worry for that entrepreneur, because I just see it as other bigger corporations that are already moving forward, looking for new ideas, looking for other service lines or improving service lines. Now there's individuals out there telling literally companies all over the world what he's doing, and I worry that unless one of these companies brings him on, these companies are just going to end up taking it. So, Henrietta, what do you think?
Yeah, so we are actually with Objective Recovery, I think a prime example for a type of company that needs to take this seriously. So first of all, it's a tech company. So it's definitely, we are developing a brand new type of technology in so many levels. It's brand new, it's going to be brand new. So that intellectual property is definitely a thing to be taken seriously. And also the other aspect is it's healthcare related. So I mentioned already that the security and we hear so many scandals these days. There are so many healthcare related, mental health, even mental health related apps and products released that where the security features are not worked out. So this can be I think it's it can be still relatively easy to talk about the plans and the problem that we are addressing, the solution that we are proposing, without giving away details and the secret sauce. And this is the important thing. I completely agree with not oversharing, even if the company doesn't have this kind of serious concerns, because there can be, anything can be, we need to pivot and things will change. We really don't need to give away, in my opinion, every single detail. And also another aspect that I'm dealing with all the time is that once you put just something out there that people find interesting, they will reach out to you in private. And I get so many contacts and messages, private messages on social media and emails and based on what I share online. And of course, people want to learn more about the product, and we have to be very careful not to jump into not to fall into the oversharing, even in private, when it may feel a bit more comfortable. So I'm dealing with that a lot, and it can be a bit tricky to consider who is, what is more risky, what is less risky, and what type of person and connection is safer than others.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to roll to Phil here. Phil, what are your thoughts?
I've got hardly anything to add, and I think the fact that Ian is a legal representative on this panel, then
yeah, sounds good.
He's had most things to say. The only thing I'd say, I guess, is I think about if you're going to put yourself out there in public, at an early stage, you probably need to think about your life becomes more public from that point onwards. And if you don't want to have any skeletons in your closet, really, that you want, or you don't want people finding out about things about you, when you become famous down the track. So I
agree. Let's jump to the next one. Does the high level publicity help or worsen self-doubt? And I'll start with this one. The famous example I always think of is Steve Jobs and the iPhone and how secretive it was. And there was all this buzz about the next iPhone and what features it's going to have or not have. And he was getting tons and tons of, or at least Apple was getting tons and tons of free publicity because everybody was just speculating. And there was so much hype, and I feel like, to me, that was like the first example of kind of pushing new services, new ideas in public, but nobody really knew. And he was so secretive that he would have people sign, obviously, like every part of the business cycle that they're not sharing with others or publicizing. So, and ironically, a whole industry was built around leaking this information and doing so. As far as does it bring, more help or harm? I honestly think it depends, again, on what vertical you're talking about and where you are. Obviously, Apple, with trillions of dollars behind them in marketing, they can afford a little bit more. To give a case in point, obviously they go through the legal aspect and they put patents and it's public knowledge, and it's down to the design of what they're doing. But it's actually in public. Everybody can see what they're building, what's coming, and they have the money and the lawyers to back them up. So it's not, to me, a big issue if, say, us four here decided to try to copy one of their patents and go around their patent. We don't have the resources to fight them. So I don't know. I'd love to hear Ian's perspective on this.
What exactly am I answering? I do apologize.
Yeah, no, sorry. Does the high level publicity help or worsen self-doubt?
Well, I guess that's a personality thing. I'm kind of in the middle between being an introvert and an extrovert. So I don't think too much about the stuff. There's always an element of me that's going, hang on a minute, should I just keep quiet and crack on in the background with this? I think the positive feedback, which eventually comes once you gain traction, so that's a good litmus test, does build the confidence. What I mean is, putting yourself out there. Initially, people might think, who the heck is this person? What are they doing? What sort of product is that? Everyone's done that already. But once you tweak things a bit and you start getting, a good audience and a network of people that support you and likely customers, and you start getting customers and you get an idea that what you're doing is the right sort of thing, or you're going in the right direction, then that's going to build that confidence. And I think that's necessary. But you have to bear in mind that in the beginning, like in my case, I'd post things and talk about what I'm doing, and I don't think anyone cared. So that's obviously knocked my confidence a little bit. But the extrovert in me was like, again, who cares? Life's short. You got to try something. There's so much noise out there, so people forget what you do mostly. And if they don't, and they don't feel you're credible, then so be it. But building the confidence is a process, and it does take writing out that initial doubt that you have inside, and the dealing with the negative feedback that you get from either people not commenting or giving you negative feedback.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Just one thing very quickly. The main point I want to make is that it's always a good idea to be critical about the feedback and engagement, because people have so many different opinions, and always consider it in the context of what we are doing, because some people even take the authority. For example, I see many people who are in the role of startup advising, and sometimes they come across very confident. They think they know in absolute terms what has to be done, how a new company needs to be built, and so on. So always be critical about that, and it can be a bit challenging, especially if someone is doing it for the first time, to choose what is useful, what is not.
I agree. Phil, let's go ahead.
Just one quick thing. I think there is, there's some game playing can go on here, to the benefit generally of a founder and a startup, which is, things like, would you like your name added to the waiting list? The waiting list is growing. The product is coming. Make sure you're among the first of people to see the product by adding your name to the waiting list. Tickets are selling quickly. Get in there and and see what we're doing. And there's a lot of hype building, but it draws some people in. So why not do it? So.
Yeah, I love it, and it's big, the FOMO. If you're missing out. And you're right. The big thing right now is these waiting lists, especially I'm really heavily in AI, and it seems like it's everywhere. All these AI companies are like, oh, there's a waiting list and you need to be on the list.
Yeah, and you're able to say that something's happening without actually saying very much about what it is.
Yeah. And I know and I love the marketing strategy. I know one thing I've seen a lot is if you want to jump the line or if you want to move up on the waiting list, you have to share it on your social media. And so now you're advertising more for them. And then in exchange, they'll let you in. And then on top of that, technically you're having to pay. So it's not like it's free, although at the beginning, a lot of these startups are free. Okay, so the next question, can it cause distraction from working on the product and business? Henrietta, since you came up with that question, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thank you. So this is actually one of my favorite questions and things to consider. And the main reason why I choose at the moment to do a more moderate version of building in public, so not doing posting every day and so on. So definitely the answer is yes, but I think it's not for everyone. That, you know, some people are more prone to distraction. I think it's very, very important to be aware of our own tendencies. So I already know this about myself because even before I started using social media to build this current company, sometimes it's easy to get hooked on different whatever sounds interesting, and I participated in I don't know how many different discussion forums. And sometimes it's what happens is that from a psychological point of view is that we are not even aware of what's happening, that we choose to engage and use this social media engagement as an unconscious distraction and procrastination strategy. So in behavioral psychology, we sometimes call this approach avoidance. So it's like when we don't feel like working on, for example, the business or the product, then we will jump on social media because it can be very, very rewarding for the brain. So it gives us a big hit, and so all this it's very easy not even to notice. And I see this. I always have this. Very often I have this impression when I look at some styles, posting and engagement styles, that maybe that person is just falling into that trap. It can be very, very hard to get out. It's like a technology addiction type of thing, social media addiction type of thing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else have anything to add? If not, we'll jump to the next question.
Yeah, I suppose there is a kind of converse thing there, isn't there, around many founders are very comfortable with their product development, and if they don't feel like they are great salespeople, they can tend to avoid trying to publicize what they're doing because they take comfort in what they're doing with their product.
Agreed. Awesome point. Let me jump to basically the last question I have here. Is building in public a good strategy for every personality? So Henrietta, this was your first question. I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, so I think we can consider this from different angles. We already discussed a bit the introvert extrovert angle. That's usually people are aware of where they fall, and including where many people are somewhere in the middle. And so it's I think it's even regardless of if someone is an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert, like in the middle of the spectrum, it can be helpful for everyone. It's just we need to approach it in different ways and work out the different strategies. For example, that's part of the reason why I don't do a very intense version of this online engagement, like daily and all the time. And then again, I mentioned already for the previous question, the individual backgrounds and distractibility. Again, if someone has a history, for example, you just mentioned a diagnosis, ADHD, many people get diagnosed with that, and they usually know that the symptoms and why they received the diagnosis. So that can be some people like that sometimes can be more prone to distractibility. And social media, again, it's very rewarding. It gives our brains a big hit. And then other things is the style of the posting. I think in general, it's always good to, once we start this, to figure out some level of consistency, whatever that is, whatever frequency and pattern, but to keep going. And I see so many people starting and doing this very intensely, posting a lot and interacting a lot for a while, for a few weeks, for a couple of months, and then they disappear. So in my opinion, sometimes this can give because then people wonder what happened. Did the business didn't go well, or did they just, something happen to them personally, or what? And then sometimes it can even create doubts in others in terms of the reliability of that person. That's also something to keep in mind. And so it's important to be aware of our own tendencies and to know ourselves.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything else to add? If not, we'll just jump into the Q&As from the comments.
Yeah.
All right. So our question, and feel free to jump in. Anybody wants to answer this. So the first question: as someone who lives in the States, what do you believe is valuable advice in working with an international approach in mind, specifically when the idea pertains to aspects that have for-profit, non-profit, and interdisciplinary research components involved?
I'm happy to take this one because I actually fall in this category pretty much. So what we are developing, so this will be a digital platform, and the goal, the eventual goal is to reach all parts of the world, to go global. But it can be a good strategy in the beginning to narrow it down and to really do our market research and to define what are the areas in the world that where we are most likely to get the most engagement and customers and interest, and focus on those, and focus on addressing problems and the versions of the problem that we are addressing that will satisfy those customers, and then spread out from there. And also in terms of the research, it's usually, for example, for us, it knows no boundaries. So it's more like scientific research. It's usually we consider different demographics and different populations, but it's actually an important aspect of doing research and the clinical. For example, we are running clinical studies and validation that to develop a product that will be able to satisfy needs of different in different areas of the world and different socioeconomic groups and so on.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else wants to add?
Just a more general point, which is it's really difficult to do if you haven't made connections with people in the first place. So, to put some, if you're only connected to 100 people on LinkedIn, for example, and you post something about, you're trying to do this and you want to contact people internationally in different sectors and so on, because you're not that well connected with anybody, your post will probably go nowhere anyway. So, you just have to invest the time in kind of building up, that level of connection before or alongside trying to do anything in public.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Well, I know it's the last few minutes, and I know we all have next meetings coming up soon. So in summary, I want to just thank everybody for attending. Obviously, our information is here on the LinkedIn post, so feel free to individually contact us. Or if you have any questions, feel free to put it on here in the comments, even if this recording is done. I know we'll all be checking from time to time. I did want to add real quick one last thing, just as a food for thought. We hear about OpenAI, not specifically the company, but just companies opening and creating their own open source, information. And I find that quite interesting because by doing so, it's a community involvement, getting a new product that line out. The spin that I want to add, just to kind of leave everybody their thoughts on this idea, is, Facebook created their own AI system, and they said it was leaked, and public open communities are now building upon it. But then if you read the fine print, no matter what you build or do, it has to go back to basically Metaverse or Facebook. And so I find that as an interesting point, because they're purposely building in public, they're purposely doing this, but I think it's to get the community involvement, to create a bigger product. And it's obviously in the public form, but it's at the end of the day will only be able to be used by them. So it's kind of interesting tactic. So does anybody have any last final thoughts?
Maybe just one thing I want to mention is that I find it very important, whatever style we develop with building in public, I find it very important to keep in mind that we need to develop the trust and the image, and that people can trust us. And so sometimes I feel that the doing less can be more to bring up a banality. And that's what I, for example, tend to follow, because that's also, we have to integrate reliability into this. So for example, I engage a lot. I always make sure that I maintain the connections that are established, and I don't use the general posting and the general new engagement and new connections at the cost. And so, just to interfere with the relationships that I'm already building. So reliability is very important, especially early on.
Agree. Awesome.
I can add one more thing from my side. I found that roughly at the time that I got traction, I'd started the community approach, and trying to start off with 5 people that I get on well with, who are people that are as actively posting on LinkedIn and things like that as I was, and start from there. There are a lot of really good communities out there, networking events, and I think that's a very good part of it. We can get lost in the posting and being, public about things and marketing and all of that, but it does come down to people and relationships, as all of us have said, and all of you listening probably know already. But the relationships are the bedrock of all of this. And if it's 5 people, and then it's 20, and then it's 100, it's 1,000, you've got yourself a foundation for your business in many different ways. So I think starting with true relationships, good ones, with good people, and you'll be good as gold. That's worked for me. I know it's worked for a number of other people.
Phil, we're good. Everybody's good. All right. Well,
I'm great with that as a final message. That's I'd say exactly the same.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I'm gonna end this, and I appreciate everybody. You guys have a blessed day, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
All right, guys.